Hello, everyone. We are at the top of the hour here, so I am going to go ahead and get started. Jeff, if you could just give me a sound check just to make sure you're hearing me okay.
Yep, I hear you just fine.
Wonderful. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Erin Gregwire, and I am one of the program managers here at Dynamic Communities. Thank you all for joining today for this webinar on creating a Dynamics 365 CRM annual plan. And our presenter today is Jeff Abels from C5 Insight. Before I turn it over to Jeff to kick off the webinar, I'd briefly like to just touch on a couple event-related items with Dynamic Communities, as well as a few housekeeping items. We just finished up our Community Summit Europe a couple weeks ago, but we do have our Community Summit Australia virtual event happening August 19th through the 21st, as well as our Community Summit North America event happening in October. Those larger community summit events involve all business application products, and we will also be offering some focus events this fall, so stay tuned for those to be announced. And those are deep dive sessions into specific products, as well as our Academy team has been busy putting together several events that they're putting on through the end of the year as well. And of course, we continue to schedule webinars for you all to attend, being a lot of us are working from home. It's a great way for you to still have some great learning opportunities. See if my slide will forward there. I wanted to mention again that our Community Summit larger event in North America this year in October has been updated now to a hybrid approach, which recently was changed. So we will be offering the ability for those not able to attend in person to attend virtually. Of course, as we learn more about, the requirements from the CDC, our company will make sure that we update our websites if that does change and we're only able to offer the event virtually. Make sure to check out our company website, dynamiccommunities.com/conferences for any updates or additions to our conference calendar. All right, just a couple housekeeping items now before we get started. We do have it set that everyone is muted during the webinar to give enough time for Jeff to get through his materials. But at the end, if you have questions, feel free to type those in the questions area, and I can certainly help relay those questions to Jeff. That chat area is where Jeff is able to see anything that comes in. So if you have an immediate comment or question, definitely feel free to use that feature as well. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the on-demand library on crmug.com for you to reference after. So now that I have covered all that pretty fast, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Jeff Abels. I hope you all enjoy the webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Jeff, to get things started here. So let me go ahead and change it over to you.
Awesome, Erin. Let's see. So screen check. Can you see just the slides?
I can.
Okay,
Or I
thanks.
can see, let's see, I'm seeing the creating a CRM. Is that your slide deck there?
That is it. Yep.
Perfect, great.
Excellent. Thank you, Erin. And by the way, I'm not the greatest at monitoring incoming questions. So if there's any issue that comes up and I seem to be glossing over it, Erin, please feel free to jump in and interrupt me.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everybody. Great to have everybody here today. Looks like we've got a decent sized group for these days. So glad you could make it to talk about creating the CRM annual roadmap, going beyond just a roadmap, but planning for things like adoption and those kinds of things. So we're going to move pretty quickly through the content today because there's a lot of it, as you can imagine, and only 1 hour to try to cover all of it. I'm going to provide a few options that Erin alluded to near the end. If you want to do a deeper dive with this, we are doing a full day session as part of Nashville Summit this year, whether you're remote or in person. So if you want to dive deeper, you'll have an opportunity to do that. But really, planning is about a little bit more for CRM is about a little bit more than just planning. Part of planning has to include things like how are we going to change the thinking of the people in our organization, because we're doing things differently and we're thinking about things differently. So one critical group of people to think about is your leadership team. This is great information that comes from Harvard Business Review. And there's a link down there at the bottom I'll talk about in a minute that you can go to for more information. But Harvard Business Review, when they looked at companies effectively transforming digitally, whether that's CRM or any other kind of people first digital transformation, right? Not old legacy stuff, but the modern day sense of what digital is all about. They actually found that when leaders and managers look at the tool not as just a digital tool for the company, but as a leadership tool and as a management tool, those companies were much, much, much more effective at actually driving change and creating revenue growth. And you can see there, all these statistics come directly out of the article. One of the interesting things was they said, hey, two critical things that these organizations that are being successful have is they tend to have a digital coach, not necessarily the topic for today, but they also tend to have a clear digital vision, which is the topic for today, a big part of what we want to talk about today. So very, very important that you get your leadership team engaged throughout this process. Now, I'm not going to point this out on every slide from now on. I'm just going to point out now, you are going to see this little orange flyout on a number of slides that has more information. Those are links to either articles or videos or downloadable ebooks or tools or whatever that you can tear into for more information, because we're covering a huge amount of knowledge in today's session and I can't give you a lot of depth. Instead, I have to focus on a lot of breadth. But there are other tools out there you can go to get more of the depth if you choose to do that. So as we start on this, a lot of organizations, first of all, think, well, we've got CRM and we want people to be engaged with it and we want better customer engagement. And maybe they're frustrated with that. And so the next thing they think is, well, I go to this roadmap session, I'll have an annual plan, I'll put a roadmap together, and maybe that will give me the engagement I want. Truth be told, there are a lot of other things beyond roadmap that are a part of the planning process, right? I won't even name all of these. I put the slide together to say my focus today, when you look at all these different things, and certainly there are many, many more than this, but these are kind of the cornerstones. My focus today is just on roadmap. All these things are important, and some of them play a little bit of a role in the roadmap, and we'll talk about those a bit. But I don't want to present this as this is the end all be all. If you have a roadmap, all of this is taken care of. You need to have a plan for each one of these other things as well. Okay, quick intro to me. I've probably met a lot of you before. I will apologize to those of you who are saying, oh my gosh, I've seen this slide a dozen times, let's move on. But just real quickly for those who haven't seen this before. My name is Jeff Abels. I run a business in the United States focused on this idea of customer and employee engagement, this idea of where digital meets the human touch, not to replace the human touch, but to help us as humans have broader and deeper and more meaningful experiences and engagements with people inside and outside of the workplace than we could have without it. So that's kind of my mojo. That's what gets me excited. And I'm also excited, by the way, because I just became a first-time ever Microsoft MVP. So that's exciting. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. Basically, it just means I do a lot of stuff like what I'm doing right now for you guys. And I've written a couple of books on the topic as well. And in fact, I'm helping a coworker write a book specifically on sales process design right now as well. So that's all the geeky business stuff, and I enjoy that greatly. But here's the reason that I enjoy that greatly too, the family stuff. So 2 grown daughters, both married. We love hanging out with them and our sons-in-law. We particularly like that little guy in the lower right corner there, Theodore Evergreen Tremolini. He is our first grandson, born right as this whole COVID thing was starting, the day after St. Patrick's Day. My wife and I love being empty nesters. Verdi the dog is our new friend to keep us company in our empty nest. And when we have time, we love hanging out with each other, doing things like drinking nice wine and riding our Harley Davidson. We try not to do those 2 things at the same time. Okay, so love to get to know you guys better too. Not easy to do in this one-way format, but hopefully we'll form some connections. So when you think about a CRM plan, you can think about it kind of like this idea of we want to go to the new world, right? We want to go to the promised land. We've heard other people are going there. We know this is something we want to do. And so let's go there. And so what most leadership teams do when they begin that journey is they say, well, look, we got to go across this big, long, dangerous ocean of unknown stuff. We're uncomfortable with this whole idea of CRM and what it is. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? Well, most people who are doing that say, let's research and find the best darn boat we can, right? Let's go get demos and understand licensing and all of that kind of stuff. So they select their boat and off they sail. But when they sail off, they haven't thought about, well, who's the captain and who's the crew and who's the navigator and where are we really going with this thing? And so oftentimes they get out into the middle of the ocean and all of a sudden they realize we didn't have a plan. We didn't have an idea for where we were going and what we were trying to do. And so our crew is mutinying. Hey, this thing isn't giving me any value. It just gets in my way. It's Big Brother looking over my shoulder. Or even managers say, I don't understand how I get value out of this as a manager. They're lost at sea, right? Every direction you look, you kind of go, all I see is ocean now. I don't know why we even are on this boat anymore, right? You haven't answered the why question. On the other hand, as another extreme, you have organizations that are very plan oriented. And we're going to start with a detailed waterfall plan to know exactly where we're going and exactly what we're going to do. We're going to have all of our requirements down. Off they sail, straight as an arrow, only to often find that after they've been going for 9 or 12 or 18 months, they look around and go, well, now that we're here, this really wasn't the place we should have gone to. And it's going to take a long time to refuel this boat and re-outfit it and rechange where we're going to get to the right destination. Now, silly as this illustration seems, I use it with executives and leaders all the time. I can't tell you how often I see them shaking their heads yes as they look at this going, this makes perfect sense. One of these scenarios feels a lot like the journey that we went on. So one of the reasons why you wind up on that journey is expectations, because here's what the expectations look like, right? You basically say, we're running our business right now the way we've been running it for a long time, and we know how it works. It's comfortable. We know how to get down this road to get things done day in and day out. And so we've got a lot of institutional knowledge just built around that, and we're comfortable with it. But we recognize we've grown and the world has changed and our competition has changed and what our customers want has changed. And we need to take this comfortable, slow moving old country road and we need to make a super highway. We need to create something super efficient. And so again, you get a demo and you think that demo looks super highway, right? That looks like that's where we want to go. But what you never talk about up front are some expectations around if you want to build a super highway, you're probably going to have a lot of construction, right? You're going to have people actually moving more slowly trying to go down those old roads while the new roads are being built. And there's going to be confusion and frustration and slower moving things. Things will slow down before they go faster is the way to think about it. The other thing people often approach each project as is more paving potholes. Look, we've got some processes and let's just take those existing processes and let's kind of fix them up a little bit. Well, that's fine, but you're not going to ultimately get where you're going with that approach either, which we'll talk about in a second. And then lastly, maybe you actually succeed in building the superhighway, which is great, but nobody's on it, right? So relatively recently, and by relative, I mean it's probably been 8 years ago now, I got a motorcycle again. I'd ridden as a much younger person, stopped basically as an adult with children. My wife and I decided we wouldn't do that for a while. But once our nest emptied, I said, I love doing that. Let's go get a motorcycle. So we did, and we love it. But for about the first 6 months, I took mostly back roads, and I still do that most of the time because I enjoy that more. But I didn't take highways because I wasn't very comfortable, right? I wasn't comfortable with my bike. I didn't trust it. I didn't know its limits. I wasn't comfortable with myself. I didn't know what I could do with it. But I sure wasn't comfortable with that 18-wheeler that was 6 feet away from me. But a few times during that period, I wound up kind of getting thrown out onto a highway without meaning to. And it was scary. It was a hair-raising experience. And that's what's happening to our users oftentimes is we think this is a no-brainer. You should be using this. But really, if I take that old road on the left, I know where it takes me. It's comfortable. I know how to pull the right strings to get things done. I know where the fallen logs are over the road. And although it's awkward, I can get over those easily. That fast moving highway, I'm afraid I'm going to push a button and blow something up. I'm afraid I'm going to have trouble finding something that I can't get done with it. That's what we're facing when we do this. So Paving potholes, there's a time and place for that. But remember, you don't build your superhighway by paving potholes. So you need to decide, is this paving potholes right now? Is this just support and incremental things? Or is it a plan for something bigger that's going to take us further? And I would submit that part of the problem with a lot of CRM projects is they started as paving potholes, they never stopped paving potholes, and they have much bigger problems that need to be solved. So when you think about a plan, this is a great quote to think about with your plan, right? So just thinking about not just what do we do, but understanding what are the problems we're trying to solve. So that's what we're going to focus a lot of our time on today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this 4-part framework to think about as you get into trying to develop your plan. So 4-part framework is this. You always want to start with collaborating, right? So you want to listen to your team. You want to engage your team in the process, leaders, everyday users, maybe even customers for feedback and those kinds of things. Collaborate together to say, I got to gather a lot of information and a lot of perspectives from a lot of different voices. Then number 2, do the analysis. Okay, you spent a lot of time assembling the raw material, all these data points that you've gathered. Now look at all those data points and say, what is the preferred method to get this stuff done? What problems am I solving? What's the right order of events to get that done in? And that's where the expertise in the system and in the process is really, really important, right? So collaborating, people will tell you what they want. Business analysis is where someone looks at that and kind of says, I heard what you want, can't give it to you when you want it because of this, but if I move things around this way, we can move you in that direction. So a different type of expertise. Then document it, put it all together, assemble the plan so that it's ready to go, and then 4, validate it. Go back to that group and say, here's what I heard you say, here's the approach we're taking, here's why. Be open to, it might not be done yet, so go back and do some rewriting of the plan. This looks like, oh my gosh, this might be super time consuming. If you're big, it might. There are some clients we work with that every year when they do their plan, they begin scheduling 6 months before the end of the year in order to begin the planning so that it's done, in place, and ready to go by the very beginning of whatever their fiscal year is going to be. But others go in and out of this within about a couple of days to a 1-week period. So you can right size this for your organization. One thing I always like to say is adapt, don't adopt. I'm saying a lot of things to you today because I've assembled them together from best practices with what we've done over many, many years with many, many clients, but it is not one size fits all. In fact, it's one size fits nobody. Adapt this to your culture, to your realities, make it work for you. Now, to make this really easy to remember, 4 things we're really doing today. We're going to talk about how do we listen to the team? How do we truly understand them and the technology? How do we then connect back to them with a document and a plan and a process to get things done? And then how do we know what the results are to get them to validate that and give us 1 round of improvement before we go into executing this? If you've heard me speak before, you've almost certainly heard me use those 4 words before because they're the framework for every human relationship. And that's really what this is about. It's about understanding human relationships so you can build a better plan. And why are you building a better plan? Ultimately, so you can better connect with humans inside and outside of your organization as well. We call that being powered by luck as an acronym. Listen, understand, connect, and know. So let's talk about those 4 things as our framework for the rest of today's session. The first thing to think about is this, and almost nobody gives us enough time. Everyone shakes their head and says, yes, I agree, this is important. And yet, most of the projects we get engaged in are people saying, we need a redo, we need CRM 2.0, we need to get back on the tracks. We had an okay project, but in the future, we want to do so much better. We're constantly being asked to participate in those. And when we do that and we go and we look closely at the artifacts for what went into the project the first time, virtually every time they did not do a good enough job answering the question, why are we even doing this? Here's the outcome from one organization who did this. Let me juxtapose it actually to the standard one. A lot of organizations we get engaged with after they've started have a team called something like the CRM project team or the CRM adoption team or something like that. This organization did a good job of answering their why, and they said, we're going to have the customer experience improvement leadership project. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, and the stuff below it is a little different because it connected with their particular business objectives. So don't worry too much about the full mission statement. That first opening title for the leadership team is the one that's important in this case. So essentially what they said was, this is not about technology, right? So after we'd come in and they had a team called the CRM project team, what they realized was they kept gravitating towards, how do we make the technology work? How do we get people to use technology? Technology, technology, technology. And they stopped talking about, this is a tool to run our business. This is a tool to help us serve people better inside and outside of organization. So one of the first things they did was they rebranded the project to say, let's talk about a title that describes why we're doing what we're doing. So whenever we meet as a team, we always come back to that instead of this thing. And by the way, if this thing, this piece of technology is in the way of that mission, that's not what this mission is all about. If we have to get it out of the way, we will. And they made some pretty significant changes once they moved to that way of thinking about things. So take the time to answer your why. And this will kind of be part of what you can do as we walk through these next steps. The next thing to think about is, okay, Jeff, you talked about listen to people. Who do I listen to? How do I assemble a team of people I'm going to listen to? Well, I love acronyms, so here's another acronym for you. CUBS. You want to think about 4 constituent groups of people, or even things, you can define some of these as stakeholders that you want to listen to, personas you want to engage with. Now, when it comes to CRM, the least listened to stakeholder in almost all CRM projects is the customer. Most CRM projects kind of deteriorate into, how can we sell our products to our customers better, right? And it's not necessarily a wrong thing, but innovative projects focus on, how can we understand our customer to come alongside them, and for some organizations even partner with them throughout the selling process, instead of just having better broadcast channels and better ways of setting up processes for our salespeople to do call downs and that kind of stuff. And again, I'm not bad mouthing any of those things. Every single one of them has their place. But if you look at these 4 constituencies, most often people do not give enough time to, how do we listen to the customer as a part of this? And that can be through research surveys or direct interviews. Then your users. Now, what people often miss with their users, they tend to think, okay, well, the marketing department are users, and the customer care department are users, and the sales department are users. And they mostly focus on reps. Or if they do focus on managers, they really focus on managers coming in to tell them what they think the system should do for their reps, rather than, this is a management tool. Remember, I talked about leadership early on. The ones who are really successful wind up having users like the CFO, the Chief Marketing Officer, the head of HR, sometimes the COO or CEO, involved in the project too, to say, I am a consumer of this too. This is a tool to help me make better decisions and better connect with what's going on with the team that I am charged with managing as well. When you get that kind of traction, you're much more likely to have success. Now, it doesn't mean you get them all in the room at the same time. And then there's the business. Now, when people see business, they think, oh, okay, that's the leaders. No, leaders should actually be considered users in my experience. Is more a thing. The business itself is its own entity, right? In fact, if you look at how governments define businesses, they literally give them an entity name. Just like there's a human entity, the business itself is an entity, and the business has its own needs too, right? So depending on what kind of business you are, the business might need to generate a profit. The business might need to generate donations. What are the business's needs? And then systems. And systems are the systems and the people that support the systems. So the IT department. Now, I can tell you one thing I see go horribly wrong in these cases is, sometimes it is the IT department is running this project. They approve the budget, they put the project plan together, they mostly own the requirements, and so on and so forth. Almost never a good idea. Equal and opposite problem. IT has enough to do, and they don't know about this kind of project. So we're going to do this without IT engaged at all. And now the business is working with a partner or on their own, and just doing stuff that later IT gets engaged in and has to pick up the pieces and fix it. Look, the business needs to own it. The business needs to own the budget. They need to have ownership of the requirements. They need to own actually using it. If leaders and managers say, I got too many other things to do, so I'm just going to say, let IT manage it, great vote of confidence for IT. We trust them. I can tell you, I've done dozens and dozens of these projects. I've yet to work with one that's come out really good that's been managed that way. The business is not engaged, you're going to have a problem. So those are the stakeholders that you want to somehow get involved. You also want to think about who is our project leadership team. Now, you might have a lot of different teams involved in this. So one thing I see people do sometimes is they say, here is our CRM leadership team, or if they've named it right, here is our customer experience leadership team. But then they start to have everyone from the CEO to individual sales reps on that team to people in IT, and it's just one team. The second you have some technical conversation in that team, you're going to lose those senior executives and managers. They're going to go, I don't understand this. This is not a good use of my time. I need to go somewhere where this is going to make more sense to me. So think about, depending on your size, you might need more of a team ecosystem for this. And you might need to plug into your own existing teams. I did a session on using CRM for sales meetings. That doesn't mean create a new sales meeting to use CRM. That means you probably already have a cadence of a team and meeting that's going on with. Plug into that existing structure to use it, but set up the right structure for other teams as well. Now that you've got the stakeholders together, now that you've figured out in particular who your leadership team is, this is the opening question we like to ask them. We like to ask them the vision question. And you can kind of see it on the screen here, but it's basically saying, hey, let's say we get back together again in 2 years. And let's say we're saying CRM has been amazingly effective in these 2 years because, help me finish that sentence, leadership team. And by the way, leadership team might be, when you're at this stage, a representative sample, maybe 1 or 2 reps, maybe 1 or 2 managers, maybe 1 or 2 executives, your project manager, your business analyst, maybe someone from IT. That's okay. Not too big, no less than 5 people, no more than about 9 people, but this is your leadership team. It might be the only team you meet with, depending on your size, or you might have a bunch of subsequent follow-up meetings after you get started. But you want to ask them this question, and you want to basically say, look, write these down. Like, there's ways to do this digitally, there's ways to do it physically. So depending on where you are with COVID, you might do it differently. Or if you're just global, you might need to be all digital anyway. But you want to basically say, help me answer that question, and help me answer it by giving me at least 3 desired outcomes. So write each down separately. We use Post-its or stickies to do this with. Write them each down in a separate sticky. And if you've got 5 or 10 or 15 ideas, God love you, write all of them down, but give us at least 3. So if you're someone who's kind of a little more withheld or doesn't have those kinds of ideas, sometimes that person has that one idea that's a game changer. So challenge everybody to get at least 3 ideas down and put them down on the board. Now, that kind of process, we call it luck storming. And it's this idea of saying, meetings are usually, by the way, if you sit down at a round table, as most CRM planning meetings go, and you say, okay, what do you want to get done with CRM? And you start to have a conversation, you'll find 1 or 2 people absolutely dominate the conversation. 1 or 2 people say almost absolutely nothing in the conversation. And by the way, the ones who say nothing might have much more institutional knowledge than those who are very talkative in the organization. Plus, you find it's a very slow way to actually move forward. If you use this type of meeting, you're listening to everyone, you give everyone in the meeting a voice, you understand there's actually tools for prioritization. I don't know if I'll have that in today's slides or not, but happy to chat with you about that after. So you actually validate what people are saying. You have back and forth discussions that are built into it. You make decisions and set priorities together. And then, because it's almost self-documenting the way it works, you can actually quickly share the results out with everybody and give them another chance to know if the information gathered has really been as inclusive as you want it to be, or if people would like to submit some more information to you. So it's a really great way to run these meetings. We've had people, even in large organizations, who I kind of thought, wow, they know all the tricks. They do meetings like this already, and afterwards pulled us aside and said, I've never had a meeting like this before. So most of the stuff we do with luck storming, and by the way, there's luck again, is publicly available. There's all sorts of facilitation methodologies out there. You can buy books on it. You can go to the internet and find some different ways to do it. And so most of those are publicly sourced. We've developed some of our own innovative things on top of that. Now, one thing I'll caution you when you do this process is sometimes you get goals and not very specific goals. So what I mean by this is people will say stuff like, it should be fast, it should be user-friendly, there shouldn't be bugs in it, everybody should want to use it. Those are great things. In fact, I've gotten to the point now where I'll even say those things out loud up front and kind of say, we know this, we know these things already. What I'm looking at is a little more depth, a little more specificity to the ideas. and not just a goal, right? Like sales revenues have doubled. Awesome. I'd love to help you double your sales revenues, but that doesn't really help me understand what we need to do with the system per se. So the way somebody in a faith-based nonprofit put it that we worked with once was, after getting a bunch of ideas like that, she was the general manager of this faith-based nonprofit, and she said, you know what? These are great goals, and I'm so glad as a leadership team we have these goals. I hope we can achieve them. But you know what? Goals are God's job. Remember, faith-based nonprofit. Goals are God's job. So what we can do is we can influence these goals. So let's take these and put them up here back at the top and say, what are we going to do? What do we need to have done in order to meet these goals? And had a great conversation after that around, here is the plan. Here are the things I need to do better. Oh, I'm the sales manager and I need to double sales in the next 2 years. I need more productive and efficient meetings with my sales team. How are we going to do that? I need better information about what they've done in the past. How are we going to know they're getting that in there? I need them to have a forward-facing plan. All of a sudden, we have real outcomes we can start to put together to help them put things into CRM to move forward. So be careful about that. Pie in the sky, generalized goals are all wonderful. You need marching orders too, right? You need some specificity around these things. And as the facilitator, you should help steer the conversation towards that. And if you can't get them to say it themselves, start to give them some of their own ideas. Hey, what about, would this help? Would this help? Get their gears turning a little bit, because people aren't used to being engaged this way. Now, remember I said this might be your one and only meeting, or you might have multiple meetings. So the next thing is, if you're a larger group and you have the time and or funding to make it happen, you'd start with a leadership team and do that. And I've shortcut the process a little bit. There's a little more to it than that. But you start with that, and then you might go, okay, let's go to different departments and get the department heads and some of the individuals in those departments to also meet with us to talk about these different things, or the different lines of business, or the different customer care teams or sales teams or marketing groups or whatever it is, so that I'm asking the same essential question of multiple people who ultimately report up to that leadership team. Because assuming the leadership team in their ivory tower actually has granular information to set priorities is a really, really poor assumption. Plus, even if they do, the more people you get engaged in the team, the more those people are likely to embrace this change when it comes their way, even if it's not everything that they said it should be. So you kind of repeat the process with other teams, then come back to the leadership team in the end and say, we've gathered this information from these 3 or 5 or 8 or 15 different teams. Here's what their priorities are. Now, leadership team, we need you to look at all of their priorities and help us to set a master list of priorities that includes yours that we started with, but that also includes all of the teams. And that's where you start to get a lot of innovative ideas. Now, one other thing, I'm trying to give you the most rapid process possible to help build this plan. Depending on who you are, there's a lot of other things you can do. Some of it can be very, very helpful to do. So remember, there's a lot of ways to listen to people even outside of meetings. Here's a partial list of different things we've sometimes done for clients throughout what we've done. So be aware of those and know, again, adapt, don't adopt. We're doing a project for a university right now where we're actually doing cultural surveys, understanding their culture and cultural barriers to what's going on. We're doing ride-alongs. We're actually spending time virtually looking over the shoulder of people doing their jobs so we can understand some of the struggles that they have with things, because sometimes they don't know how to articulate that or don't even know that they're having a problem until we look at it over their shoulder as experts and say, oh, wow, we see they're struggling with this, and they don't even know to bring it up because they just think it's kind of, that's just how things work and they can't do anything about it. So lots and lots of things you can do to try to listen and gather information to help build a better plan. So, and this is the most important part of it, the listening part. If you get this right, the rest of it kind of, I don't want to say takes care of itself, but it sure is a lot easier. Again, Einstein said, spend 95% of your time figuring out the problem and 5% solving it. Listening is really how you understand the problem. And then when you're done, this is physical collaboration, but again, you can do this digitally. You have something that looks like this. So we've said, here's what all of our teams have said they want their priorities to be in prioritized order. And then we'll move forward to now to prioritize those, which I'll show you in a second. And by the way, if you're looking for a way to do this digitally, A tool we've been using since before COVID, but now we're using it really intensely because of COVID, is called Mural. I believe I didn't verify that link, but I think it's either mural.ly or it's mur.ly. But it's a great tool for taking that exact same thing you would do on a whiteboard with stickies and voting and all that stuff, and it gives you a tool set to do it. It includes some awesome templates and stuff like that. We have our own templates we do for what we do, but there's some stuff built into it. So now you've got the raw material feedback, you've brought it to the leadership team, and generally you say something like, okay, look, let's now prioritize all these different things. So you might put dates across the top. We kind of like to do that to say, realistically, do you think you can get this done in 3, 6, 9, however many months you can do it in? Now, some people say, how about we kind of say phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something like that, because we don't know enough about these things to know. That's fine. What you really want to walk away with is, from a leadership perspective and the team's perspective, leadership has taken all those things and said, here's all the things we want to do. Here's the sequence in which we believe they should happen. Now, they might be wrong. You as the expert might step in and go, I understand you'd love to have that in phase 1, but it's going to take a long time to do it. Or there's these other 2 things you have to do before you can even get it done. And those 2 things are going to take 3 months to do, so we can't do it until phase 2. So just because someone says this is the order we want to do it in does not mean it's the order they get it in. It means they're giving you their voice, influencing the outcome. Now, you as the analyst in the next step have to decide how you can make all that work, or if you can't, how you can move it around to make it work. One other thing we do, by the way, is usually that very first phase, or the 3-month piece. First of all, if you look, it's usually the 80-20 rule. So 80% of what everyone wants to get done is in the first 20% of the project plan. And everybody who does it looks up there and goes, I know we can't get all that done in the first 20% of the project plan. So the next thing you do is you take that first 3 months and you go, let's now reprioritize that. Let's give everybody some voting dots. And let's say, okay, of these things in the first 3 months, what are our priorities within those? So you have as detailed of a list as you can to break those things down and begin to move forward. So at the end of this step, you package it all up into, I call this raw material. And I call it raw material because that's what I want it to be, right? Raw material meaning this is not the plan. This is not even recommendations. This is knowledge. This is a result of me, of us listening in the organization. It's pictures of the stickies and put them into tables, and reports we've run and we've pulled out of CRM, because that's part of listening to people too, and survey results, whatever that is, but one thing that says this is the raw material. And ideally it comes together very quickly, because when you run these right, it's almost self-documenting. So you don't have to wait 3 weeks after you do this to then say, okay, I finally got this document together. Hopefully within 1 week after you do it, and it usually takes somewhere between 2 hours and about 8 hours, depending on how systematic you can be, you can put all of this together and say, here's the raw material findings. And you can A, use that to do your own analysis. B, you can give it back to the team to say, look, go through this. If anything pops out as you as a new insight because of this, or something that we overlooked because of this, I want to hear back from you. Truth be told, most of your people who are engaged in this process may never look at it that level of detail. All you need is the one person who asks the hard questions and helps you refine things, and makes all the difference in the world. But this is just raw material. It's just kind of like data, no decisions, just data at this point. And now you use that to move into the next step. Now you say, I've got to look at all that and somehow analyze it to come up with what I think is the plan that's going to work for us. So how do you go around about doing that? Well, your big picture goal is this. You want to understand the current state and explain it well, and you want to envision the future state. So part of it is, again, remember, 95% of the time defining the problem, not just defining the problem so you really understand the problem. You define the problem so that you can explain the pain of the problem well too, right? A lot of organizations don't realize how much pain they're in. I just went to the chiropractor. I had some kind of neck injury that I haven't started taking care of literally just this week. It was very painful. Pain started actually wearing off by the time I went to see him on Monday. And when I went in there and he kind of did some stuff to my neck, he's kind of like, okay, let's turn your head this way. Is that where it hurts? And it's kind of like, whoa, yeah, that's where it hurts bad there right now. And by the end of that meeting, I was more convinced than I was before I started the meeting that I need to get this treated. I need to take this seriously. I've been there with this kind of injury before. Don't want to have that again. That's part of where you are. A lot of your team doesn't understand what kind of pain they're in. So you help them look at it and go, look at this horrible, scary, frightening, dangerous, inefficient bridge that we get wet every time we cross, either because we fall through or rain falls on us. And look at this picture of where we can go in the future. A safe, straight, neat, solid framework of a bridge that we can go through time and time again to get us to where we want to go. That's the picture that you're trying to do. And so how do you do that? Assess the situation, identify your opportunities, and build your business case. So how do we do those three things? Well, assess the situation. Remember, that's kind of the where does it hurt? And you go back to our personas for this. So one of the things we like to do is persona assessment with it. So instead of just coming back high level, ideally go back and look at your personas and say, here's this group of personas, and here are the pains that they have and what it's costing them. If you try to look at it from a completely global standpoint, you might get a few high-level insights, but if you can explain the pain person by person, persona by persona, you're going to get a lot more granular detail around what really is the situation with this persona. Why is it hurting this role within our organization so much? And remember, Cubs is a high level. You've probably now broken it out into sub personas where you say, well, we've got users, but we've got frontline sales reps, frontline customer service reps, middle managers for both of those things, executives over both of those things, and so on and so forth. So get all of those personas and do persona analysis around them to say, what are the issues that's affecting each one of them? And you can even start to tell user stories. So here's a very, very simple template for telling user stories that, again, start to explain pain and opportunity a little bit. And this is a super simple one, right? So, hey, I'm a road warrior. I'm out of the office all the time. And you know what? It is a pain for me to put information into CRM. It just takes me too long. But I got to get it in there because my manager needs those reports. So I need a way to easily capture that so I can get it in there automatically for my manager to see. How can I improve those things? That's my pain point. That's a user story. That's a simple user story. The other thing to think about as you consider the current state and the future state is this. Integration is not optional. I can tell you I do a whole separate series of things on adoption and effectiveness of CRM. I can tell you uh, probably no CRM solution is ultimately effective if it's not integrated with other systems within the organization. In fact, I think I'm doing one on MAP systems, marketing automation platforms next week that plug into CRM. And one of the things, one of the key findings there is 89% of marketers have integrated their marketing solution with their CRM solutions. CRM and marketing need to talk to each other. CRM and ERP need to talk to each other. You can't give people one more rock, one more system they have to go to in CRM. You have to start taking systems away and saying more and more of what you do can be done in fewer and fewer systems. You may never get it down to just one or even two, but if you just keep saying more and more can be done in less and less, that's the goal you want to have. If you keep adding systems, you will ultimately tear at the fabric of your organization, the culture, and even the satisfaction of people. If you need statistics around that, let me know. I've got plenty of them. So we've talked about the current state. Now, how do you envision a future state, and how do you explain that vision to other people? One really important thing to remember is this. You need to know, or somebody on your business analysis team needs to know what works versus what is asked. There are very few people who are good at this. But truth be told, most of the user experience issues we fix are due to this. What I mean is this. So many organizations we get invited into say, look, this thing doesn't do what I told so-and-so to make it do. Our IT group or that technology first partner that might have awesome CRM certifications, I told them what to do, and look at this. This is a mess. It doesn't do what I want. Show us what you told them to do. You go look at the requirements and you kind of go, actually, they made it do exactly what you asked them to do. You shouldn't have asked them to do that. You needed to explain that differently, right? What is asked versus what has worked. You need somebody in between who is that bridge builder who says, I speak the language of business. I speak the language of these users. I've walked a mile in their shoes. I'm deeply empathized and in touch with them. But I also deeply understand the technology and what it's capable of doing. And when someone says, I want something, I can see the problems with doing exactly what they ask pretty quickly, and I can help to push back constructively on them and say, Well, look, what if we did it this way? Would that actually work better for you? Can we pilot that quickly instead of investing a lot of time and money in doing that? You need someone on your team who can do that. Either they're leading this process or they're at least contributing to this process to make sure someone can very easily create a picture of what's asked versus what works. Another thing can help is to do a gap analysis. So gap analysis is just as simple as this. As you look at one requirement, one problem you're trying to solve, and remember, you're going to be trying to solve a lot of them, right? By different personas. So breaking them down one by one, some of them you'll say, let's do a gap analysis on it. So a gap analysis says this, look, here's what you told me. This blue ball is what you told me you want to accomplish. Everything in that blue ball is everything you would like to do. And by the way, our current investment in Dynamics 365 can do this out of the box. And you can see, hey, there's some places where it overlaps. There's some places where it doesn't. Where it overlaps, that's the fit. Where it doesn't overlap, that's the gap. That's fit gap analysis at its simplest. The next thing you do with that is say, well, how can I cover more of that gap? Well, there might be easy things you can do out of the box to configure it. There might be more sophisticated things where you have to write plugins or get third-party solutions or do some kind of deep integration to customize it. Costs a little bit more, costs a little more to maintain as well, but maybe worth the investment. So now you wind up with a fit gap that looks a little bit different, but you had to make some effort, make some investment to do it. And what you're finally left with is this. At the end of your fit gap, you say, look, here's what we can do. Here's the budget to do this. Does the business buy off on that? Here's the risk. Hopefully the risk is either completely gone, you've covered 100% of the need, or it's a little fingernail, right? It's a little shaving thin thing that you go, we can live with these few compromises. What a lot of people miss over here as you put together the business plan for this is there is also an opportunity. There are things you don't even know you can imagine to ask for that this can do. So when they go, oh my gosh, this risk, I can't stand it because we're used to in the old system, we have this pop up and it's got a red button on it and a blue button. And when I click the red button, it does this. And you can't give me a red button and a blue button? Wow, that's not going to work for me. Like, well, wait a minute. I can give you Outlook integration that's very deep. I can give you Microsoft Teams setup and integration with this. I can give you AI that reminds you to do certain things that you didn't even ask for. So can you give up on the red button and blue button in exchange for all these other things we get? And maybe we'll find out we don't need that as much. Start to have those kinds of conversations. But most people don't focus enough on the opportunity. They focus on, here's the road I used to walk. Something feels weird and new about this road, and I don't want to do it. True story, many years ago, somebody was using ACT, if you guys remember the ACT system, and literally had something like this where they had customized it to do, they generated a job number for a colored job jacket or something like that to coordinate folders, physical folders they track. And so they were deploying Dynamics 365. They say, we've got to have this. And we kind of had the conversation with around, well, really the way you'll track information, you'll be more digital now. You may not need any of this. No, no, no. We absolutely have to have that. Well, you could cover that. Through configuration and customization, we could get rid of that gap. So we did. They paid us to do it, and we did it. And about a year later, someone was using it and said, why do we have this ridiculous number and this red button over here? It wasn't a red button, but it was a color coding of some sort. It's been a while, I'm forgetting. And essentially it was like, yeah, you didn't need that, right? But you couldn't kind of get your head around that the world works a little bit differently right now. So hopefully you have those conversations. Sometimes we win them and convince people, sometimes you don't. But if you can't convince them, at least maybe you can cover some of the gaps for them. Now, the other thing to think about is a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Stories sell. So I like metrics. Most of us probably do. If you're technical people, you're probably kind of numbers people too, but stories sell. So here's a way to tell an executive story that we've done. We usually do this for every plan, especially the first one we do, to help people. Hey, once upon a time, we were this nice small little organization. We added some customers and we had connections directly to them, and we grew and we added more customers and partners and had relationships with all of them, and we grew and we added apps and things got a little more challenging, and we grew. And you know what? We started adding new offices in different places that weren't well connected with each other, and we merged and acquired other organizations, and we got even more complicated with lots of different systems, and our customers and our vendors and our partners started wanting to communicate with us through all these different channels. And now we had influencers that we also want to connect with. And now into it, we have thrown this thing, I don't know if you just saw it bounce in, called CRM. And all of a sudden, all those lines have multiplied because we haven't taken anything away. this is a mess. Look how messy it is. Look how much more messy it actually is with CRM than it was without CRM. Our vision for the future is to be able to say, let's take those customer-facing people and let's minimize the number of systems that they have to use to get their jobs done so they can do more things in fewer places. Now, I know that's kind of like my sailing story that I told just a minute ago. For many of you, you might look at it and go, man, that's ridiculous. Yeah, that's like way oversimplifying. And by the way, this vision will probably never fully achieve this vision. And I think most leaders and executives get it. But I think what they respond to when I've shown them things like this is, wow, when you show how messy that, whoops, didn't mean for that slide to proceed. When you show how messy that situation was, it rings true to me. I can feel it. I realize our business is ridiculously complicated now, and people are running around doing stuff that I sure wish they didn't have to do. And you've given me a vision that we can begin to chip away at that. So we're not going to be there at the end of this year. It might take 3 or 5 years. We may never be there, but we're going to be closer and closer to it with every passing year as we implement this plan. That's part of telling the story. But you do want the numbers too. You want the business case also. So you can build what I call a generic business case, and that means just take some industry normative data, and this comes from Nucleus Research, and say, okay, well, look, given this data and given the realities of our organization, here's what our estimated return on investment for this is. And this is our annual ROI. So not just ROI minus budget, that's after we've taken the budget out. And here's our 5-year present value of making these changes now. Now you have a pretty tight business case put together. But remember, this is what I call a generic business case. So it's not looking at your specific business and saying, here are the things we're going to make more efficient. Here's the gains on item by item, and here's the ROI. This is just saying, this is a credible third party who says this is what to expect. We've run the numbers. Here's how they work for our business. That's kind of a low-cost way to begin to put a business case together. If you want to put more time and effort into it, you actually look at your own business, look at the pain points you're trying to solve, and say, what is that worth to our business? And ultimately, it's really just for most for-profit types of businesses, it's about more revenue, lower costs, higher margins, and everything else just kind of contributes to those things. Now, there might be some quantitative things too that are also important, but the quantitative, of course, is going to be an important part of it as well. So you can usually look at a few of those and say, well, look, here's some ones we can really pick out. For instance, we just finished a project for one client where they said, we've got an inside sales team, and it takes X amount of time for them to fully follow up with one lead. And we can get that follow-up time down by about 20% per person to follow up on each lead that we're dealing with. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but essentially what they could say is, now we're going to take our 10-person team and we're going to get done what 11 or 12 people would get done if we didn't automate this. Wow, what's that worth to us to not hire 2 people that we otherwise are going to have to go hire? That's a really clear business case I can put together. Now, one thing I'd advise you on this is if you're talking to a finance person, be careful and think through how you're saying this, because their next question might be, wow, who do we lay off? So there's a time and place for studies like that too, unfortunately. That's not what we want our business to be. That's probably not what most of you want to be. It's mostly about saying, let's drive more productivity so we can actually get more done with the existing people that we have. And then when we do hire people, they'll be more productive as they begin to plug in and engage with us as well. And this is just actually taking some actual numbers out of that. Won't go through that in detail again. Happy to walk through this with any of you guys if you want to, but that was solving for one particular pain point. Ideally, you have a long list of those so you can look at all of them together. And ideally, you can say something like, okay, look, we're going to spend, $200,000 or $2 million, whatever it is, over the next 12 months to get this done. But our return on investment is going to be, 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times that much, even within the first 12 months after completing all of these things, and on a continuing basis after that. Remember, there are non-financial parts of your business case as well. Qualitative things can be very important, especially depending on your culture. So consider those. We've got some ebooks for you where you can pull a bunch of those out as well. So now you've done the hardest work. You've done all the listening. You've done the analytics. Now you need to take all that information that you've put into some kind of form and say, let's reconstitute it into a document that is our plan. What goes into that document? I've mentioned almost all of these things already. Pretty simple stuff, right? So you can see all this to say, here's the things they should put into it. Probably just as important to remember is what not to put in the plan yet. So remember, this is an annual plan, or maybe it's an initial roadmap, depending on where you are. So you don't want requirements in here yet, right? You do not want detailed waterfall types of requirements. That's going to come later. You don't need full project plans. You kind of need more the list of projects you're going to execute, or you can call them milestones within a big annual project if you want to. But you kind of want to know what the projects are you're going to get done, about the timing, but not the requirements yet, not the details, just the high level. Full budgeting, ideally, you're running this with agility. You're also using agile budgeting. That does not mean you say, we have no idea what it will cost, so you're just going to have to trust us. But instead, you say, look, for at least the first phase, we've got a pretty good budgetary parameter, and maybe we have some general idea for the rest of them as well. And we're going to do our best to manage that budget, but we're agile. If you want to know 100% accuracy of what the budget is up front, you need to know 100% accuracy of what the waterfall requirements are up front. And a lot of experience suggests that is not the right way to manage a CRM project. You don't need your physical data models, your governance plan, your support plan, your adoption plans. You might have passing mention of all those things. You might mention them in the plan itself. Hey, these things need to get done, but we're going to do them in real time as we move along and execute our plan with agility. What might a plan look like? Maybe something like this, right? Now, again, I've said this before, don't adopt, adapt. This is not your plan. This happens to be one I pulled out of a document that we did for somebody. But essentially it says, hey, we've got these 6 projects that we know we can kind of predict we're going to need to get done. There's some other stuff we know we need to do in the future. And by the way, that solid blue bar on the bottom of it, these are other things we need to kind of keep in mind and keep executing on continuously while we're executing against these projects, right? That's a good annual roadmap type of plan. Remember, the waterfall approach, big steps lead to big mistakes. You set off on your long journey, you go straight as an arrow, you find out you're in the wrong place. Now, I don't think this is a real picture. I would assume that they figured this out a little before they got this far with it, but the concept is true. Many times organizations have said we executed our project plan with rigor, and yet here we are, not where we thought we were going to be by the time we finished it. Taking big, huge leaps forward, waiting a long time before you adopt something new, opens up greater and greater risk that you're not ultimately going to get where you need to go. Whereas if you can set up a small incremental plan with little steps, small rounds of user acceptance testing, ideally even small rounds of rolling things out, not always possible. If you're upgrading from a legacy CRM system to a new CRM system, it becomes really painful if you're kind of using the new one, but still kind of using the old one. So you need to kind of decide how that fits within your plan. But even if you have to kind of throw the switch close to all at once, at least do incremental user acceptance that's in depth so that people don't just experience it for the first time on the eve of cutting over. They've had a lot of opportunity to feedback on it before they've done that. And then remember, when you deliver your plan, for us, we used to, and occasionally we still have to, but we used to deliver big Word documents with lots of details in the plan. Still not waterfall, but a lot more detail. If you're a big, complex organization, you may still need to do that. But that's generally really big, really complex. For most organizations of most size now, we're moving with agility. You don't want that much detail in there because by the time you finish the first 1 or 2 phases, what you're going to find is you've learned something new and the plan needs to change. And do you really want to rewrite all of that? So something like PowerPoint is more than up to the task for the high level plan. So again, you kind of saw the recommended roadmap. This is a different one than the example I gave you. Each item on that recommended roadmap that could transfer into 1 page with a little more detail about that item in it, as well as estimated dates. And if you're ready, budget. What we find is do the first quarter, do the first project budget. If you try to estimate the other budgets, you're going to be off so often it's hardly worth it, but some people insist on that. Maybe a few design documents. And once you get adoption of that, by the way, then you'll take your first phase and you'll put that into a detailed scope of work and all of those other details underneath it. But kind of start with this to get things moving. So your last step, with just a few seconds left here, but you now say, I've got the plan, but I'm not approaching it as it's given. I'm going back to my team and saying, I want you to help me validate this. Let's go through this plan together. Let's look through this deck I've created together. Let's figure out what small steps we can take to ultimately lead to transformation. And this is our way of doing agile project execution with small subsegments within sprints being the smallest component, sprints above that, projects above that, and then the long-term vision overall, along with governance, support, and change management on an ongoing basis, because just doing the work is not going to get the work adopted. It's going to lead to an empty highway. Again, I don't think of those as part of the roadmap. You only address them at a high level. You have a plan for doing them, and you execute that plan as you execute the roadmap. Remember, CRM is changing all the time. You're not going to be done. What changes faster for a business than anything else? Your customers do. You need to be able to change with them. Be prepared for that. Quick rating guide for your roadmap. So as you put it together and you want to go, well, is this a good roadmap? Well, rate each of these things from 1 to 10. The higher your score, the more confidence you can have you've got a pretty solid roadmap to move forward with. And there's a download with more information on that. I started with leadership. I want to end with leadership. Remember, it's easy to get lost in all the details of how do I build this plan. Remember, a big part of this is you need engaged leaders. You need to have the business owners of this and executives somehow engage in it. And you also need leaders within the frontline people to represent for their teams. If you don't have leadership engagement, business leadership engagement, you're going to have a big problem. The good news is if you do this right, this is the kind of planning that leadership wants to engage in, not the detailed nitnoid stuff, but the high level planning stuff. It's a great way to keep them engaged in the process. Couple last things and then we'll wrap up. So keep in mind that we do have an upcoming academy session, a virtual academy session on the 18th of August, CRM leadership and adoption. That is a half-day session. So we're going to do a lot of the same content you saw today, plus some other content on adoption. But we're going to be a little more interactive with helping to put the plan together. So if you want to dive a little deeper, that's a great way to do it. At UG Summit this fall, we will be in Nashville. Hopefully you'll be there too, but even if you're not, it'll be virtual and on premise. We're going to do a full day planning and adoption workshop. You could join us for those. And if you're looking for a virtual workshop just for your group, half day or any day, just shoot that out in the feedback. We're happy to get some of that stuff out to you as well. By the way, sorry, I just realized I misspoke. The half-day planning and adoption workshop is not about the annual planning. It's mostly about adoption, so it's not as much of this content. The full-day planning and adoption workshop, that's this stuff plus some other things. Sorry. But if you do want a half-day workshop just on this through UG, ping them, let them know. We just canceled one because we didn't have too many people attend. We can reset that one up. Or if you're looking for one just to be executed just for your organization, reach out to me. That's what we do all the time. We'd be happy to engage with you on it. If you want the links and the ebooks and all of those things today, hit me up on email. There's my email address. If the luck principle is of interest to you and you'd like to dive deeper with that, the book is out there on Amazon. It's a real easy Saturday afternoon read if you want to just sit down and absorb that. And of course, this is what we do. If I can help you in any way with either technology implementation or troubleshooting or doing a health check or getting into planning, reach out to us. We'd love to engage with you. Erin, I know I've gone a few minutes over time.
Yeah.
I still have a few minutes. I can take a few questions if you'd like.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for this amazing webinar. If anyone has questions, definitely feel free to type that in the questions area. We'll stay on for a couple minutes if you have questions. I know we're a little bit over, so I appreciate everyone sticking on here.
Yeah, for those of you who are exiting, thank you for coming. Enjoyed chatting with you today. Hope you're taking some good value away. And please fill out the questionnaire too. I love to get the feedback. I keep improving this every time I do it because you guys take the time to share some information.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for attending. I'm not seeing any specific questions come through just yet. So, you know, Jeff, like he said, is always available through his contact information there. But if no questions, Jeff, thank you again for this great webinar and thank you all for attending. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Yep, bye-bye.